The front near Pokrovsk is turning into a graveyard of Russian assault units. Massive forces deployed, yet no breakthrough. Meanwhile, a new kind of war is unfolding. The trenches are gone, replaced by the vast, drone-controlled no-man's land where technology, not manpower, decides survival. At the same time, Ukraine's air power is on the brink of transformation. An historic deal with France could reshape the skies and finally shift the balance. Beyond the front lines, hybrid warfare is spreading across Europe. Sabotage strikes critical rail routes in Poland, pushing NATO to prepare for confrontation. And now Washington is preparing a different strike, one aimed not at troops but at Russia's war economy. A sweeping sanctions bill could cut off Moscow's oil profits and starve the Kremlin's military machine from within. All the details in our special edition of Hotspot. Russian occupation forces have made almost no progress near Pokrovsk and Myrnogorod despite deploying massive reserves and treating this sector as a priority axis of their offensive. The enemy continues to loot both personnel and equipment while failing to achieve its declared objectives. And that's not the only setback for Russian troops. More details from the front line coming up in our military briefing.
Russia is on fire. An underground section of a main gas pipeline exploded in the Omsk region. And in addition, drones attacked the two main thermal power plants in the occupied part of the Donetsk region. The city and several other settlements lost power. But that's not all. The Russians are bombing their own people in the Belgorod region. In 11 days, 8 aerial bombs were dropped from Russian planes onto the heads of local residents, causing fires and destruction.
Cars burned, the fire started. They hit the minibuses. 18, about 114 or 18 people were injured. No way!
And while Russians in the rear are dealing with the aftermath, the occupiers are also getting hit on the front lines. Drone forces destroyed Russian robots at a critical section. The Ukrainian armed forces disrupted a new supply scheme for the occupiers. And the battle continues. The advance of the occupying army in the Pokrovsk and Myrnogorod area is minimal, despite the colossal resources the enemy has thrown at this direction, which is a priority for them. The occupiers are trying to encircle Ukrainian forces and trap them in a pocket. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War write,
Ukraine's defense forces are conducting successful counterattacks not only in Pokrovsk itself, but also along the Pokrovsk direction. First and foremost, this refers to the successful actions of Ukraine's defense forces in the Shakov area, which in turn creates logistical problems for the occupying troops. And they have managed to significantly stabilize the situation in the Rodinsk area. Rodinsk is a key logistical hub for Ukraine's defense forces.
In Kupyansk, Russian troops have failed to encircle the Ukrainian armed forces and are gradually losing positions within the city itself. Ukrainian defenders have managed to cut the occupiers off from their main supply lines in the northern part of the city.
In Kupyansk itself, Russian assault groups are effectively cut off from ground logistics. The occupiers' logistics are maintained through the use of heavy drones. The occupiers in Kupyansk are using the so-called TFO, infiltration tactics of small assault groups, and the tactic of flag planting. That is, by infiltrating groups of 2 or 3 people, they try to create the illusion by planting the Russian aqua-fresh flag of the presence of occupation army units in various areas of Kupyansk.
France is developing a new generation of SAM-T air defense systems. Ukraine will be the first country to receive these systems. The delivery dates have not yet been disclosed. As Zelensky stated, this new generation of air defense systems represents a very serious capability for intercepting Russian ballistic missiles.
This is essentially the European counterpart to the Patriot surface-to-air missile systems. At this point, according to various estimates, up to 2 SAM-T systems have already been delivered to Ukraine's defense forces. The SAM-T system consists of 6 launcher units and a radar station. Currently, according to open sources, the French army itself has up to 10 SAM-T systems in service.
Meanwhile, Poland is preparing to deploy territorial defense troops to patrol key parts of critical railway infrastructure in the east of the country. After a sabotage was carried out on the line near Lublin, the Polish General Staff is now preparing for an attack.
Let me remind you, back in 2015, Ben Hodges stated that the Suwałki corridor is the Achilles heel of NATO countries. And let me remind you, the Suwałki corridor is a land corridor which, according to the Russians' plans, is supposed to connect the Republic of Belarus with the Kaliningrad region and, accordingly, pass through the territory of Poland and the Baltic states. That is why the Polish side takes the issue of a possible direct confrontation with the Russian Federation very seriously.
Moreover, Ukrainian military personnel may be involved in defending the eastern borders of the EU from Russia in the event that the war ends with a peace agreement.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
On several frontline sectors, traditional trench lines have effectively disappeared, replaced by a deadly 20-kilometer wide gray zone where no side maintains fixed fortifications. Instead, drones dominate the battlefield, monitoring movements and striking targets around the clock. Military analysts say this marks a fundamental shift in the nature of warfare. The advantage now belongs not just to those who can produce drones at scale, but to forces capable of rapidly adapting technology, integrating real-time intelligence, and executing precision strikes. What risks does this new environment pose for Ukraine's defenders? And why are the Ukrainian armed forces currently outperforming Russia in the drone war? We'll break it down in our latest report.
A drone operator from the 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade perfectly drops a grenade into a trench with Russian soldiers. One of them tries to throw the explosive out but doesn't make it in time. As a result of the successful drop, several occupiers were eliminated. This is exactly what modern warfare looks like now. In fact, there are practically no assaults or frontal attacks with vehicles. Drones have put an end to positional warfare. That was the headline of an article published by the American outlet Politico.
The fighting in Ukraine no longer resembles the trench warfare of World War I. Instead, drones have erased the continuous front line, creating a kill zone. As a result, a gray zone of chaos has formed, stretching about 20 kilometers from the front line, where drones hunt soldiers. The wounded are left to die, since evacuating them is extremely difficult, and delivering ammunition, food and water to the fighting troops is almost impossible.
The sky over the gray zone is shrouded in smoke from drones. UAVs are equipped with thermal imagers, cameras, bombs and cannons, and some lie in wait for hours on the roads, waiting for military vehicles to pass by. At the same time, there is a hunt for UAV pilots who are sitting tens of kilometers away.
We have moved on to a war of drones against drones. Now drones can set up ambushes, intercept enemy logistics systems and disrupt supply lines. In addition, it has become more difficult to hold positions. If you are detected, all the weaponry in the area will immediately be directed at your destruction. Pavel Palisa, Colonel of the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
Russian military public pages are quoting this article, but as always in their own way. Here is one example of Russian propaganda, where it is claimed that Russian drones give the Ukrainian armed forces no respite, although in reality it's exactly the opposite.
Because of Russian drones, Ukrainian soldiers are forced to stay at their positions for weeks. Drones make evacuation, rotation, and the delivery of ammunition and food extremely dangerous.
Information from open sources shows that it is actually the Russian army that abandons its wounded soldiers instead of evacuating them. Now, Russia is also trying to keep up in the production of various strike UAVs. For example, in frontline areas, the enemy has started using a new type of Iranian drone, the Shahed 101, a warhead weighing 8 to 9 kilograms and a flight range of several hundred kilometers. So far, the occupiers have not managed to localize the production of this drone in Russia. The UAVs were produced in 2024 in Iran, but it's only a matter of time. The Russians learn quickly from their mistakes.
We're going head-to-head here, and they have some really impressive developments. Their science is well established and functioning. They've managed to suppress and break down, any internal resistance or attempts to oppose the war. And that's why they have these developments and the machine is working. They were preparing for war. They improved the Shaheds, made Lancets from Israeli drones.
Drones have become so effective that they've even pushed artillery back from the front line and have made it nearly impossible to use armored vehicles to supply the troops.
Drones have become useful for delivery and evacuation, combat reconnaissance and remote mining, tasks that were previously usually carried out by people in war.
Despite different resource capabilities, Ukraine currently has parity with Russia in drones on the front line, and in some areas even has an advantage. But the development of this military component doesn't stop for a minute.
Ukraine is set to receive a groundbreaking military package from France, 100 Rafale fighter jets and 8 SAMP-T air defense systems totaling 48 launchers. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the deal following talks with Emmanuel Macron, calling it a historic agreement that fundamentally upgrades Ukraine's air power. This is not just about new aircraft, it marks the creation of a fully integrated air and missile defense architecture compatible with NATO systems. The agreement paves the way for a full transition from Soviet-era aircraft to modern Western multi-role platforms. Up next, we'll take a closer look at what Ukraine's air fleet is projected to look like by the fall of 2025.
France is strengthening Ukraine's defense, particularly in the areas of air defense and aviation.
President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that our country will be able to receive 100 Rafale F-4 aircraft, powerful French radars, 8 SAMP/T air defense systems, as well as 6 launchers. In addition, Ukraine is receiving 55 electric locomotives, which will provide further support for the country's infrastructure.
What was signed with Mr. President is more of an authorization for delivery. But with Dassault, contracts have been signed. This will be an actual agreement for the supply of aircraft. So we have a political decision. Yes, right? A separate agreement will need to specify all the financial terms under which we will receive these aircraft.
It was stated that Zelensky did not disclose the full list of aid for security reasons. However, even the published list could create significant problems for the Russians.
The Rafale is more in the category of heavy fighters of the 4++ generation, well, if we consider the modern version of the Rafale. In terms of takeoff weight, number of hardpoints, and combat load, it is comparable to the Russian Su-35 and Su-30 SM fighters, in other words, the most modern Russian fighters. The Rafale and Gripen are being equipped with Meteor missiles. This missile is equipped with a ramjet engine, not a solid fuel one, but a ramjet. It already has a range several times greater. Initially, its range was announced as 200 kilometers. Now, in fact, the figure of 300 kilometers range has been repeatedly proclaimed in promotional materials. In other words, this missile is certainly not at all inferior in its technical characteristics or performance to the Russian R-37M missile. However, it will actually be a permanent weapon.
Since the summer of 2024, American F-16s have been carrying out combat missions in Ukraine. To further strengthen its air defenses, our country intends to purchase Gripen fighters from France. These aircraft can compete with the F-16s, and not only them.
The F-16 and Mirage 2000 fighters that we received are currently being used for air defense missions at about 70% capacity. And the Mirages are actually used 100% mainly for the air defense tasks.
Earlier, Zelensky and Macron signed a declaration of intent to cooperate in the acquisition of defense equipment by Ukraine.
Unfortunately, our financial capabilities as a country that is very peaceful and has been at war for 3.5 years do not currently allow us at this time to purchase aircraft. For now, we are only being given aircraft.
On the eve of his visit to France, Volodymyr Zelensky announced a historic agreement and a significant strengthening of Ukrainian aviation. In addition to France, Spain is also preparing an aid package for our country. At the moment, Ukraine's priority is to strengthen its air defense.
Russia is already operating on NATO territory, not through open invasion, but through sabotage, covert operations, and hybrid warfare. A recent example is the series of deliberate disruptions to Poland's railway system, which temporarily crippled key transport routes and raised concerns about the security of critical infrastructure across Eastern Europe. Russia responded forcefully, signaling what officials describe as a state of pre-war readiness and tightened coordination with allies. But the key question remains: can Poland and the broader NATO alliance prepare in time if Moscow continues escalating not with tanks, but with covert operatives and cyber sabotage? More about it in the next report.
There is no need to make things up and, based on these inventions, form an opinion about Russia. There's no need to create an image of Russia as the enemy. Look, you've made up this idea that Russia wants to attack NATO. Have you completely lost your minds or what? You're as dumb as this table, honestly. Who came up with this? This is nonsense, you understand? Utter rubbish.
The Kremlin has begun preparations for war against Poland.
We are now closer than ever to open conflict since World War II.
This is a pre-war situation. The General Staff has announced a planned attack.
The aggressor has started preparing for war. He is creating an environment meant to undermine public trust in the government, the army, and the police, in order to set the stage for potential aggression against Polish territory.
The chief of the General Staff of Poland stated that recently there has been a significant increase in acts of sabotage in the country, as well as large-scale cyber attacks. These events may indicate that Russia is creating conditions to destabilize the situation and weaken the state from within. One of the most recent such incidents was an explosion on the Warsaw-Lublin railway line.
Analyzing all the incidents that have occurred in Poland and Europe, one can say that all the traces lead east to Muscovy.
Polish authorities believe that this episode and other similar cases bear the hallmarks of premeditated operations that may be linked to the activities of foreign intelligence services.
The sabotage of the railway line on the Warsaw-Lublin route is an unprecedented act of subversion, directly targeting the security of the Polish state and its civilian population. We will catch those responsible, whoever they may be.
2 months prior to this, about 20 Russian drones entered Polish territory en masse for the first time. Poland's security agencies stated that the threat from the drones was more serious than the authorities had initially believed.
The claim that these were merely cardboard and paper objects is not entirely true.
The Polish leadership does not hide the fact that it is preparing for a direct confrontation.
We can respond to these threats either symmetrically or asymmetrically. We have the full arsenal of tools at our disposal.
Military analyst and former SBU officer Ivan Stupak is convinced that the Kremlin is already waging a hybrid war against Europe, and the only question is when it will escalate into an open conflict.
For Russia, what it is currently doing in Europe is already a war. Asymmetric, non-linear, hybrid. Call it what you will, but it is ongoing.
Poland's strategic position between the Kaliningrad region and Belarus makes it one of the key countries for the security of all NATO. And Warsaw itself plays an important role in ensuring the protection of the eastern flank. Subsequently, the defense of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania will directly depend on the ability of Polish forces to respond to potential threats in a timely manner.
Everything depends on our stance, whether we can deter the enemy or encourage them to act aggressively.
While most European countries spent many years discussing the potential threat from Russia, Poland was engaged in systematic and purposeful preparation. Over the past decades, Warsaw has significantly strengthened its military potential, and the buildup of its defense capabilities began immediately after Russia's annexation of Crimea.
While other countries waited to see who would make the first move, Poland took action.
In 2024, Poland's defense budget grew to 4.7% of its GDP. This is the highest figure among all NATO member states. Modernization of military equipment and increasing the number of troops to more than 200,000, this makes the Polish army one of the largest in Europe. In addition, Poland has become one of the largest purchasers of weapons from the United States. The country has invested about $50 billion.
Without the United States, there is no alliance. We need to spend more on defense not to replace the Americans in Europe, but to keep them here.
Poles are tired of the war going on in the neighboring country, so there has been a deterioration in their attitude toward Ukrainians. The Polish Minister of Defense stated that people do not see the main enemy, and those who incite against Ukraine are acting against Poland.
This should be valued and respected, not used to incite hostility against Ukrainians in Poland or to stir up anti-German sentiment.
The chief of the Polish General Staff called for the creation of a Cold War 2.0 for large-scale investment in defense and for making it clear to Moscow that any attack on NATO would receive a decisive response. Now, however, the future of European countries depends on NATO's readiness to defend.
Donald Trump's strategy is straightforward but potentially devastating. Cripple Russia's military capabilities by cutting off its external oil revenues, the primary source of funding for Moscow's army, missile programs and drone production. The White House is now poised to approve the bill. The analysts warn it could deliver the most severe economic blow to the Kremlin since sanctions were first introduced in 2014. For Vladimir Putin, this isn't just a financial hit, it's a direct threat to the sustainability of Russia's entire war machine. All the details up next.
America is preparing to deliver the most painful blow to the Kremlin. Donald Trump makes it clear. The era of soft sanctions is over. If Russia does not stop the war, the world must cut off its oxygen.
Any country that does business with Russia will face very serious sanctions.
The US president is ready to sign a new package of sanctions against the Russian Federation. According to Reuters, the White House has already signaled Congress. The 47th president will approve the bill, but only on his own terms. If it includes a provision that secures for him the personal, exclusive right to make the final decision on whether to impose sanctions or not. This is exactly what becomes the main bargaining chip.
For the White House and the president, it has always been important that the sanctions package contains a clause guaranteeing the president the right to make the final decision on sanctions. Therefore, if this is included, I think the president will consider signing the bill, said a source in the White House.
The bill was authored by Republican Lindsey Graham and Democrat Richard Blumenthal. The document provides for 500% tariffs on imports from countries that purchase Russian oil, gas, and uranium. The goal is not just to hit the Kremlin, but also to cut off the oxygen to all of Moscow's partners who continue to support the financing of the war.
At this point, Trump is determined to put additional pressure on the Russian Federation, particularly on its oil market, quite actively.
Trump's new sanctions could deal a devastating blow to the Kremlin's economy. The Russian oil market risks losing its key buyers. India, China, and Middle Eastern countries are under threat. Trump, meanwhile, proposes to expand the list of targets and add Iran to the sanctions list, a country that helps Moscow circumvent restrictions and strengthen oil schemes.
When we clearly understand that 60% of Russian oil is bought by China and the Americans are against it, are unlikely to escalate, any forms of sanctions, especially after the meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump. Essentially, they have taken a one-year timeout on imposing mutual sanctions. Most likely, part of the Russian oil market in China will remain. At the same time, countries, for example, those that were among the top buyers of oil by volume, second and third, we're talking about India and Turkey, are now actively seeking alternative sources of supply.
While across the ocean they are preparing to deliver a decisive blow, REFI is dealing with the consequences of yet another sanctions package. At the end of October, the US introduced a new package of sanctions against the Russian oil sector. Rosneft, Lukoil, and 31 of their subsidiaries fell under the restrictions.
They have already been seriously shaken. The Russian market plummeted sharply. The price of Urals really did drop dramatically. And at the same time, yes, as of today, there is a very serious problem with foreign assets, particularly for Lukoil. At the same time, we've already heard that the American company Chevron has received preliminary approval from the US Treasury Department to negotiate with Lukoil about purchasing and their foreign assets. The approximate value of this package is estimated at around $20 billion. Well, in any case, such developments are underway and we're watching closely. That is, we need to understand that the assets we're talking about are the very instruments through which the Russian Federation sells its oil. If these instruments end up in other hands, then Russia will have significantly fewer opportunities to maintain the current volume of oil sales it has today.
If Trump does end up signing the bill and countries reduce their purchases under US pressure, the blow to Russia's budget revenues will be catastrophic. Even Russian propaganda will no longer be able to hide the real economic consequences. And the Kremlin will feel pressure it has not faced throughout the entire full-scale war.
Until we see the final version of the bill, until it is well, at the very least, approved by the majority of the American parliament, in this situation, it's nothing more than, let's say, threats.
At this time, that's all from me, Maria Faravanova. Even more hellish frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.